There are tons of SaaS app and UI animation videos online right now, and a lot of them use these clean outline strokes around buttons, panels, cards, and interface elements. In Figma or After Effects, this is basically just a stroke, as far as I know. In Blender, not exactly. So in this video, we'll build a reusable geometry nodes outline asset. You can control the thickness, offset, color, opacity, gradient, and you can stack as many outlines as you want. So let's build it. I'm starting with a simple plane with a UI on it. I'll make it a rounded rectangle first, because I like it. So I add a bevel modifier, set it to vertices, and round the corners. Now we add geometry nodes. We take the input geometry and convert the mesh border into a curve with mesh to curve. Then we convert that curve back into mesh with curve to mesh. For the profile, we add a curve line. I set the start point to -0.1 on X, keep the end point at 0, and plug it into profile curve. That tiny line becomes the thickness of the outline. Then we add set material and assign the outline material. Now, if we want a gradient, we need to send some information from geometry nodes into the shader. So before the curve line goes into curve to mesh, I add store named attribute. I set it to Boolean and name it cell. Since the curve line only has 2 points, I use index, compare it to 0, and use that to store the value only on the first point. Now in the shader, I read that cell attribute and use it as the factor between emission and transparent. At first, the fade is way too harsh, so I add a float curve after the attribute, and now we can shape the gradient properly. That's the whole idea here. Geometry nodes creates the mask, and the shader turns that mask into a nice fade. Quick thing for the people who make money with Blender. My rate was probably less than $1 per hour on my first paid project. Like literally. The client paid me 20 bucks on Fiverr, I spent 5 on voiceover, and then spent like 30 hours making the animation. But I'm eyeballing it. And yeah, why even eyeball it? That sucks. So if you want to know your real hourly rate, feel free to check out my app. Link is in the description. I've been using it for a few years, and that $1 turned into $150 per hour. By the way, if you actually start using it, I'll put your nickname in the next tutorial. Alright, back to the setup. Now let's expose some controls. First, offset. To move the outline in or out, we need to move both points of the curve line by the same value. So I add combine x, y, z, plug it into both the start and end points, and expose the x value as offset. Then I expose the scale input from curve to mesh, so we can control the outline thickness from the modifier. But now there is a small issue. When we change the scale, the offset doesn't stay where it should. It doesn't feel intuitive and kinda pisses me off. So before the offset goes into combine x, y, z, I divide it by the scale, and now it works nicely and I am happy. Now we want to store the color, so we do basically the same thing again. I add another store named attribute, set it to color, name it col, and plug in a color input from the modifier. In the shader, I read the col attribute and plug it into the emission color. And because I also want this same color input to control transparency, I use the alpha channel in another mix shader between our current shader and transparent. So now one color picker controls both the outline color and opacity. Right now we only have the outline. To bring back the original plane, we simply add join geometry and join the original input geometry with the outline. Now the shape and the outline are together. And now we can make this more useful, because if this is supposed to be a reusable asset, I want to stack multiple outlines on the same object. So I can have one outline close to the shape, another one further out, maybe different colors, different opacity, different scale. But if I duplicate the modifier right now, Blender starts treating the previous outline as part of the new input geometry. So the next outline is not only reading the original plane, it also reads the outline created by the previous modifier. That is not what we want. We want every new outline to still be based only on the original mesh, our plane. So after the color attribute, I add geometry to instance. Visually, almost nothing changes, but now the outline is stored as an instance, not as regular mesh geometry. Then before mesh to curve, I add separate components. And from that node, I use only the mesh output. So mesh to curve ignores all previous outline instances and only reads the original mesh. That is what makes stacking clean. There is one more tiny fix. When multiple outlines are stacked, they can sit perfectly on top of each other, causing some intersection stuff. We don't want that, of course. So we need to lift every new outline by a tiny amount. Not enough to see it, just enough to keep the layers clean. To do that, I use domain size and set it to instances. This gives us the current instance count. The first outline has 0 previous instances. The second one sees 1. The third one sees 2. So I multiply that count by a very small value, like 0.0001, and use it as a Z offset in set position. Now every stacked outline is pushed slightly above the previous one, and now we have a reusable outline asset. We can duplicate the modifier, change the offset, change the thickness, change the color, change the opacity, and build multiple clean UI style strokes on. So if you make SaaS videos, app animations, UI explainers, or anything like that needs clean motion graphics, save this setup somewhere. Turn it into a reusable asset. It is basically the kind of outline control you expect from Figma or After Effects, but now it works inside Blender with geometry nodes. Hopefully that was useful, and if you make money with Blender, check out Tasky below.